So now I'm doing a test with my AirPods in to see what it sounds like if I narrate while I'm painting, which is typically what I do when I'm at school teaching in person. Well, I'm also listening to NPR, which I listen to all day long while I'm working. So what I'm doing now is I'm carving in. So when I started painting, I just kind of like slam in all the main structural points of the painting, like all the big compositional elements, and then once that's done, I go in and I start to refine everything. And I correct. So I really like this idea of correcting. I tell students all the time that if you're working on a painting, you want to know when it's done. I always say a painting is done when you're done making corrections. So you basically lay something down with like a lot of vim and vigor. And then you spend a lot of time going back over it again and fixing all the kind of little mistakes. And that sounds like, why would you paint like that, right? But when you do that, what you're doing is you're creating a lot of interest in the painting because you're allowing for the unexpected to happen. You just kind of paint, and you'll end up with things blending in a certain kind of way, or you'll end up with different kinds of relationships in the painting that might not have happened if you were too cognizant of it. You know, when you know exactly what you're doing, you tend to be pretty predictable in the painting, right? Like, you make the same moves over and over again. You make the moves you know are going to work. But if you allow yourself to go in and just kind of screw it up a little bit, then the possibility for you to do something different, maybe more interesting, happens because the paint starts to kind of talk back to you. So I know that sounds a little crazy, but especially once you get to a point where you have a certain skill level, you know, you get really skilled, really good at painting, it'll happen that you're just kind of too good at it and you can't surprise yourself anymore. So you have to take some risks. But, you know, you can always fix everything. There's nothing you can't fix in a painting, ever. Like, you have to kill your darlings. That's what they say about writing. It's true with painting, too. I obviously put too many trunks in here. So I'm taking some of them out, and you can see on, well, I don't know if you can see it. I don't know. It's hard to tell, but I'll paint over things I've already painted in. But gouache, by its nature, allows you to, uh, how to explain this? It allows you to go in and re-wet the surface, and it also allows you to lay paint over paint, and then the paint underneath is going to like pop through a little bit. So it's really easy to just paint over something and let it bleed back through again because you won't lose it. You can just paint over it and feel pretty confident that it's just going to pop back out again. Of course, if you don't want it to pop back out again, that's a bit of a problem. But that's the nature of gouache, so you just kind of have to learn to deal with that. It's a good idea, especially with something like gouache. You don't want to fight the paint. Probably the most common painting mistake I see over and over again, just blows my mind, is students who have been taught like, oh, gouache and acrylic, similar, or acrylic is just a safer version of oil paint, which is completely not true. I mean, it's safer, but first of all, oil paint is not that dangerous. Everybody just needs to let go of that, like right now. But secondly, all of these different paints have really different qualities, like really different qualities. So if you're spending all your time trying to get acrylic to do what oil does, or watercolor to do what gouache does, then you're really missing out on what's so awesome about painting in general. And that's that each of these media have their own unique qualities. And instead of fighting them, trying to make them do something that they don't want to do, or that they can't do, you should just embrace what's happening with the paint and what the paint's natural proclivity is. And I say that and I'm like, holy smokes, that sounds like parenting. But it kind of is. It's like you're the boss. You're not that bossy. You can make the paint do what you want it to do most of the time. But there's definitely instances where why would you fight? So if you want the effect of oil paint, you should use oil paint. If you want permeable paint that can be reconstituted over and over again and is not going to stay fixed, then you're going to use gouache. I actually think that acrylic is one of the most maligned painting media. But I love acrylic, and most of my regular work is in acrylic. This is just gouache painting, not an acrylic painting. And I love gouache. I love it. I like it because it does things that I cannot do with the airbrush. The other thing is when you're making paintings, sometimes paintings are really fast. Sometimes paintings are really slow. You often can't rush it. Never wait till the last minute. Because if you do, it's like the painting gods know they will punish you. NPR is talking about going to the movies. Let's go into the movies. Really, really like to go to the movies. See all these little brush strokes? This is like the magic. Look at these little itty bitty super tinies. I'm using this really, can you see it? Let me do this. I'm using this very little brush. It's a Da Vinci travel brush my friend bought me in Paris, and it's just like the perfect size and the perfect point, and I just love it so much, and so I use it all the time even when I'm not traveling. Make that to be a little bit more transparent. You know, if you're feeling stressed out, you can just pop in a book on Audible and sit here and do this all day long. Mm-hmm. So I'm working on this kind of blown out area here, which is pretty exciting. And, you know, with gouache, I like to get like a lot of paint going in a gouache painting, like copious amounts of paint. Just really like jam it up with paint so that I have something to work with. Because, like I said, gouache is a permeable paint, it's paint that reconstitutes. And because of that, the more you have on the surface in a weird way, the easier it is to work with because you can work back into it. So if you can see what I'm doing here, I'm laying a lighter color in here because this whole area needs to be a little bit lighter. See how it's picking up the color underneath? And that's allowing me to render as I go. So I can give this like a little dimensionality, kind of beef it up a little bit, give it some illusionistic qualities. There's some weird kind of super gestural brushstroke down here from earlier in the painting, and I can just work that right into. It's like no problem. Because this goes light and it goes dark. Now, sometimes when I'm working like this, I totally lose my place in the painting, and I end up painting the same tree twice, or miss a tree, or whatever. I don't really care. As long as the painting works. Nobody cares about your source image. People do care about what the painting looks like in the end. So if the painting works, then you're fine. I mean, unless you're like some sort of hardcore photorealist with like sort of conceptual reason why it must be exactly the same, then you probably can relax. That white is so nice coming back in. Oh, look at that. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Down here on this bottom part. I need some yellow ochre, man. Where is it? Where are you? Ochre. The other cool thing about gouache, you have a palette roll in like this. You can continue to wet that paint. So you never lose the colors that you mix. You have them forever. Okay, bump, bump, bump. Bump. Okay, I have a thing going on here that probably needs to be taken out. I got like a really rosy tree here, so I think I'm gonna reestablish this guy a little bit. And there's all these little branches and stuff in there, but I'm gonna go do those later. I'm not gonna forget about those little branches. Those are kind of like the funnest thing to paint too, so you have to be very patient. Get the structure down. get all the big moves down, then go back. All right, what's going on down here? Jesus, what did I do? I don't typically talk to myself when I paint like this, but I do have an internal dialogue when I'm painting. So maybe this is like my internal dialogue made external. Okay, so there's a tree right here. And like I said, it's not always super important that it's accurate, but I might eliminate a tree here and there or a trunk or whatever, or simplify things or combine things, and it's totally fine. But what you don't want to do when you're working from a presentation like this is just make it up out of whole cloth, and this is why I go in and do all these little corrections and stuff, because it's really easy to generalize and make like a really like weirdly generic looking scene that doesn't really reflect what the scene you're trying to paint. You know what I mean? It doesn't reflect reality, because like the trees will either be like all a little too much the same or all a little too rhythmic or whatever. I mean, unless that's what you're going for, which in this particular case, I am not going for that. So. Okay, so this trunk comes down. So this is this main cluster here. This is this cluster here. And these are much lighter than when I've painted them. So another thing you want to avoid, your brain is always going to want to tell you that things are either lighter or darker than they actually are. You have to really pay attention. Like this is actually pretty light down here. Okay.